Part C. In this part of the test, you'll hear 2 different extracts. In each extract, you'll hear health professionals talking about aspects of their work. For questions 31 to 42, choose the answer A, B, or C, which fits best according to what you hear. Complete your answers as you listen. Now look at Extract 1. Extract 1, questions 31 to 36. You now have 90 seconds to read questions 31 to 36.
Most of what I've learned about what constitutes a good scientific study, I learned by studying the flaws in a lot of very bad studies. Bad examples can be very educational. If you haven't learned to spot what's wrong in flawed science, how could you ever be sure that something is good science and doesn't have any of those flaws? Have you ever read books about neurologic abnormalities like Oliver Sacks' book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat? When part of the brain is damaged by a stroke or a tumor or trauma, strange things happen, abnormal behavior and loss of certain abilities that we take for granted. Those abnormalities are clues to understanding how that part of the brain normally works. Studying brain pathology helps us understand normal brain function. And the principle of learning about the good by studying the bad works for almost anything. For instance, if you wanted to learn how to apply makeup, it would be helpful to see examples of people who've used too much makeup or the wrong kind. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that much of CAM falsely claims to be based on science, and we need to understand why mainstream science rejects those claims. Jenny McCarthy says, vaccines cause autism. Her autistic son Evan is all the evidence she needs. She says, my science is Evan and he's at home. That's my science. Well, we can easily dismiss claims like that. As Christopher Hitchens famously said, assertions made without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. But it's not so easy to dismiss a homeopath who shows us his evidence in the form of a long list of published peer-reviewed scientific studies that he thinks have validated homeopathy. We need to understand why his evidence doesn't stand up to scrutiny. By the end of this course, when you encounter someone who's promoting homeopathy or maybe selling a miracle diet supplement through multi-level marketing, if he throws a scientific study at you and says, here's proof that it works, you'll know why his proof is no such thing, and you'll have a rational basis for rejecting his claims. Now, science is a wonderful thing. It has improved our lives, it's lengthened our lifespans, and it's given us reliable tools to understand how the world works. But for most of human history, we had to make do without science. Evolution shaped our ancestors' brains to help them survive in a world without science, a world without newspapers, books, or the internet, without even written language. They had only two ways of learning about the world: their own experiences and the experiences of others. If you ate an unfamiliar berry and got sick, you'd learn not to eat those berries, if you survived. Or a friend might tell you not to eat them because they made him sick, and you might be able to profit from his experience. Sometimes what your friend told you might be wrong, but in general, paying attention to the stories of your friends was likely to help you survive. To survive as hunter-gatherers on the African savanna, our ancestors needed to learn from stories, and they also needed to make fast decisions. So they evolved to be very good at pattern recognition and at jumping to conclusions. Have you ever thought you saw an animal and then taken a closer look and realized you'd been fooled by a stump or a rock or something? The other day I thought I saw a dead bird out on our deck, but it turned out to be just a crumpled brown leaf. We look for recognizable patterns, but we can be fooled by objects that have a similar profile. Now, let's say you're one of our ancestors on the savanna. You see something over there off in the distance in the bushes, and it looks sort of lion-shaped, but it might just be an illusion created by branches and shadows. If you see the pattern as a lion and you're wrong, you run away when you didn't need to, but there's no real harm done. On the other hand, if you miss a real lion, your mistake could be fatal. Richard Wiseman explained, "The ability to find patterns is so important to your survival that your brain would rather see a few imaginary patterns than miss genuine instances of cause and effect. That's the price you pay for being so amazing the rest of the time." But we see imaginary patterns everywhere. For instance, a baseball player notices that he was wearing a certain pair of socks when his team won, so he develops a superstition and he keeps wearing his lucky socks. His team doesn't always win when he wears those socks, but it wins often enough to reinforce his superstitious belief. Evolution shaped our thinking processes for maximum survival advantage, but it was a mixed blessing. There were advantages to our skills, but there were also downsides. We got very good at pattern recognition, and that helped us make sense of our environment. It helped us identify threats like a lion in the bushes, and it helped us learn the effects of poisonous plants or medicinal plants. But it gave us a tendency to sometimes see patterns that aren't real and to develop superstitious beliefs about cause and effect. We got very good at making quick decisions. This allowed us to react in time, to run away from the lion now, instead of stopping to think about it. But it made us more likely to jump to conclusions before we had all the evidence. Evolution equipped us with emotions that were very handy for survival. Fear motivated us to run away from the lion fast, but emotions can interfere with judgment.
Now look at Extract 2. Extract 2, questions 37 to 42. You now have 90 seconds to read questions 37 to 42.
Just describe kind of quickly here what the role is of an anesthesiologist, both inside the operating room and then outside of the OR.
Anesthesia, I kind of consider my job is to make the patient as comfortable as possible during the surgical procedure. That means I try to make them not remember the surgical procedure. That means I make them try to not feel the surgical procedure. And that means that I also try to create the best surgical conditions possible for the surgical team. My job is to basically first breathe for the patient if needed, so establish an airway. That's one of the big things of anesthesia. Take away their pain, make it so they don't move or wiggle to the point that they're going to disrupt the surgical field, and also that they don't remember and can hopefully wake up smooth.
Now, what exactly is the training required to become an anesthesiologist in terms of number of years of residency, fellowship, things like that?
Anesthesia residency is 4 years. It's technically 3 years of CA or clinical anesthesia. So CA3 is the max, but you have to do an intern year as well. And that can be in medicine, it can be in emergency medicine, it can be a transitional year. So I did my year here with you in internal medicine, and then now we'll have 3 years of clinical anesthesia. Fellowships are usually 1 year.
Okay.
There's not too many 2 or 3 year fellowships. They're usually 1 year. You can do cardiac anesthesia, OB anesthesia, peds anesthesia, critical care anesthesia. There's even fellowships on regional blocks.
Kind of like you had when you were a kid, yeah.
Yeah, to just get more experience with regional blocks. And I would say about half the people do fellowships at this point.
Do you have a particular fellowship you're interested in, or what are you planning?
If I were to do a fellowship, it would be critical care.
Okay.
I really do like taking care of sick people. Critical care can be tough and challenging, and you can have weeks where you're working 100 hours a week. Wow. And so I don't know fully, again, I mentioned the outside of medicine life's important to me.
What are some personality characteristics that you think are really important for people choosing to go into that field?
So anesthesia kind of requires, I think, an interesting personality. You have to be able to be assertive and dynamic and think quick on your feet, because there's times in anesthesia where you go from everything is going well to everything is not going well quick. And you have to be able to, in those moments, think on your feet and come up with what you're going to do. You don't have time, like sometimes we did on internal medicine, to talk about it for half an hour, what our differential is, et cetera, et cetera. You just have to be able to go. Also in the surgical suite or in the OR, it's kind of a dynamic field. The conversations between the surgical team and anesthesia are not always excuse me, sir, can you not do this? And then the surgeon saying, actually, yes, I see your point. It's very, I need this now. Yeah. Yes, sir. I need this now.
He's moving.
Yes, it's a pretty dynamic field. And so you kind of have to be a little bit tough-skinned sometimes with surgical teams, be able to be assertive and stand up for your patient when needed.
Walk us through your typical day as an anesthesia resident.
We start really early. That is one thing about anesthesia. If the OR is scheduled to start at 7, or if the surgery scheduled to start at 7, that means we have to be there well in advance to set up the operating room. So we turn the lights on to the operating room basically about 5:30 in the morning. I have to set up all the equipment, all the anesthesia equipment, drop all the drugs, get all of my lines available that I need. I see the patient in the morning at some point, go over their, before I see the patient, review their chart, then see them, go over their history with them. We always start the first IV of the day as an anesthesia resident. Start the first case usually between 7 and 8. Depends on your day. There's sometimes where it takes an hour to set it up because you're doing all sorts of lines. You're doing a spinal block, you're doing an epidural, etc. There's other times where we just say, probe sucks tube. It's a pretty standard case where we just do the induction meds, get an airway, and we're off to the races. It only takes 15 minutes or so to get going. And sometimes that one case will go the whole day. I've been involved in 14 plus hour surgeries. Wow. Sometimes that case will go 30 minutes. So that's one thing about anesthesia is every day is different.
That is the end of Part C. You now have 2 minutes to check your answers. That is the end of the listening test.